The video you are about to watch is a historical representation based on facts and accounts from the time, created with the support of artificial intelligence.
At that moment in the night, few first-class passengers realized the Titanic had already entered its final hour. The grand salons were still glowing, service moved with perfect precision, and outside, the ocean showed no sign of danger. Nothing in that world suggested urgency or alarm. Modern engineering, extreme comfort, and the rigid separation between classes created an illusion of total control. Throughout this video, we'll reconstruct how first-class luxury kept running against all odds, even as time was slipping away. So like the video, subscribe to the channel, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, grab your popcorn, and join us as we uncover how first class kept its luxury until the very end on that night in 1912. Inside the first-class salons, the night moved at an unhurried pace. Warm light reflected off polished surfaces, highlighting fine woods, detailed tapestries, and carefully placed furniture. Passengers followed their usual routines, walking calmly, speaking in hushed tones, enjoying an environment designed for absolute comfort. Service ran like clockwork, reinforcing the sense that everything was normal. There were no warning signs, just the steady rhythm of luxury meant to keep danger out of mind. In that space, the Titanic seemed to deliver exactly what it had promised its most privileged guests. As the night went on, first class stayed in constant motion. Passengers drifted between salons, exchanging quiet conversations and keeping the composed gestures expected in such a refined setting. Waiters moved through the corridors with trays of drinks and warm desserts, maintaining the flawless tempo of service. Nothing was improvised. Every detail followed a protocol designed to preserve comfort and discretion. Time itself felt slower in that carefully controlled world. For those inside, the voyage seemed to be unfolding just as planned, without a single hint that everything was about to change. As the crossing continued, the first-class orchestra kept doing what it had always done, setting the mood. Violins and piano filled the salons with soft melodies, drowning out the mechanical sounds of the ship. The steady presence of music gave passengers a sense of rhythm and stability. This kind of entertainment was essential to life aboard. Nothing suggested interruption, no sign of haste. For those moving through the salons, the night followed a carefully preserved script. While first class kept its flawless appearance, other parts of the ship lived a very different reality. On the lower decks, technical operations ran constantly, sustaining the Titanic's journey in 1912. Quiet, unseen work kept the lights on, the heat flowing, and the ship stable. This divide between comfort and labor was built into the ship's design. Luxury depended on a complex system most passengers never noticed. In that moment, two worlds coexisted, side by side, yet never truly touching. Just before the usual hour of turning in, a faint shudder rippled through the ship's structure. In first class, it was barely noticeable, felt only as a brief vibration underfoot. A few passengers paused their conversations, exchanging curious glances. No alarms sounded. The atmosphere stayed calm. Faith in naval engineering was strong, especially on a ship like the Titanic. The moment passed quickly, absorbed by routine and by the comfort that still ruled the salons. After the subtle impact, the response in first class was immediate normalization. Crew members moved through the salons with steady confidence, reinforcing the idea that there was nothing to worry about. Calm looks, controlled gestures, and uninterrupted service dissolved any lingering doubt. The luxurious setting worked like a psychological shield, filtering out signs of danger. Confidence and appearances were powerful tools of social control. For many passengers, the moment faded into just another detail of the journey. On the lower levels of the ship, reality began to shift in a very real way. Water crept slowly into technical compartments, following the internal logic of the Titanic's structure in 1912. Watertight doors were sealed according to protocol, cutting off entire sections. This technical response, hidden from first-class passengers, marked a final division between safe spaces and doomed ones. The separation between classes, already built into the ship, became physical and irreversible. While luxury remained untouched above, below, the ship's fate was being sealed. In first class, routine went on almost unchanged. Service continued with precision, reinforcing the belief that everything was under control. Drinks were served, corridors stayed orderly, social rhythm never broke. Few passengers had any idea what was happening beneath their feet. The contrast between comfort and danger grew sharper, though still invisible to most. The appearance of normalcy was enough to sustain collective confidence. As the minutes passed, subtle changes appeared in first-class dynamics. Crew members circulated more often through the salons, discreetly observing passengers. Almost invisible adjustments were made, without any formal announcement. For most, these signs went unnoticed. Trust in protocol and authority left little room for questions. What could have been read as a warning was absorbed as just another part of the ship's routine. Over time, instructions began to spread quietly through first class. Crew members guided small movements and made recommendations without raising their voices or causing alarm. Danger was real, but presented as a controlled situation within the standards of navigation in 1912. The goal was order, not panic. Many passengers followed these directions without hesitation, trusting the crew's authority. As you watch this moment, pay attention to the details and share in the comments what you think already hinted that things were far more serious than they appeared. As minutes slipped by, physical signs became harder to ignore. The cold of the North Atlantic began to seep into areas once protected, changing the very feel of the salons. A slight tilt of the ship caught the attention of the more observant passengers. Comfort, once constant, no longer responded the same way. In 1912, these changes were subtle, but meaningful to anyone watching closely. Normalcy remained, but now it required effort. Inside first class, balance shifted in undeniable ways. Chandeliers creaked as they strained against the ceiling. Carefully placed objects began to lose their stability. Porcelain slid across tables. Glasses moved on their own. The environment no longer obeyed the rules it once had. The ship's tilt became impossible to ignore. These physical signs were clear indicators of structural compromise. Luxury, once a psychological shield, was starting to fail. As the angle increased, gravity imposed its own rules. Objects once secure now moved without control, and refinement lost all practical meaning. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was focused, forced, and heavy with adaptation. There were no public protocols for handling such a crisis inside spaces built for luxury. What remained was individual reaction in an environment that no longer answered to normality. The illusion of control finally collapsed. Faced with undeniable change, many passengers responded with restraint. Movements became cautious. Gestures were calculated. Social composure still guided decisions. Even as the sense of limited time set in, open panic was rare. Self-control was part of what was expected from first-class society. Worry was real, but filtered through deeply rooted social codes. The environment no longer offered safety, only the appearance of order. As the tilt worsened, first-class salons began to empty. Personal belongings were left behind. Tables stayed undone. Luxury lost all practical meaning. Privilege, once a source of comfort and control, no longer guaranteed protection. Many hesitated to abandon spaces that symbolized status and security. Now, priorities shifted in silence. The ship demanded quick decisions, indifferent to social rank. As time pressed on, the Titanic's tilt became impossible to deny. Walking required constant effort. Heavy objects began to slide on their own. There was no room left for denial or hopeful interpretations. Most passengers had no frame of reference to grasp the true gravity of the situation. The ship now answered only to the laws of physics, not to the social order aboard. Discomfort turned into urgency. As conditions worsened, the interior atmosphere changed dramatically. Heating systems faltered. The cold of the North Atlantic claimed spaces once warm and inviting. The presence of water was felt through muffled sounds and heavy air. The music that had sustained normalcy for so long had fallen silent. What remained wasn't comfort, but clarity. That contrast marked the final shift from comfort to survival. As spaces emptied, communication between passengers grew quieter. Subtle gestures, lingering looks, small decisions replaced any need for explanation. In the corridors of first class, many understood this would be the last shared moment with strangers who had lived in luxury just hours before. Restraint spoke louder than words. There were no speeches, no formal goodbyes, only the growing awareness that every choice now carried final weight. The first-class salons, once alive with movement and soft conversation, now stood nearly empty. Chairs out of place, personal items abandoned, tables left in disarray. The absence of people made everything else stand out even more. These rooms symbolized status and absolute comfort. Now they remained only as silent witnesses to shifting priorities. Luxury endured, but stripped of meaning, disconnected from any sense of safety. From that moment on, the presence of water could no longer be ignored. The ocean advanced slowly into spaces that symbolized status, comfort, and social power. Carpets soaked up moisture. Steps disappeared under shallow sheets of water. Reflections formed where once there was shine. Few imagined that rooms built for display would be overtaken like this. The sea made no distinction between fine materials and social rank. What once meant privilege became just another flooded compartment. As water advanced, the last elements of comfort began to fail. Carpets peeled from the floor. Furniture shifted without control. Decorative objects lost any purpose. Spaces designed for stability turned unstable. These rooms stood for the peak of maritime luxury. Now, they offered neither shelter nor guidance. Luxury remained only in form, without function, unable to meet the demands of the moment. The ship's tilt reached a critical point. Movement became difficult. The idea of a safe space disappeared. Rooms once separated by function or status now responded the same way to gravity. The Titanic was never meant to endure total loss of balance. The ship's motion imposed clear physical limits. The structure still stood, but offered no room left for adaptation. As flooding progressed, the last signs of human activity faded. Lights flickered and failed, plunging spaces into partial darkness. Footsteps and movement gradually disappeared, replaced only by the sound of water and the groan of steel. Lighting and internal systems depended on a balance that no longer existed. The silence that followed did not mean calm, it meant absence. Only the environment remained, answering to the power of the ocean. When water finally filled the first-class salons, their meaning was erased forever. What had been designed as a floating palace became part of the sea. Walls, columns, and decorative objects lost all significance under total flooding. No vision of luxury imagined resistance to such an invasion. The ocean didn't just occupy the space, it erased the symbol it represented. First class ceased to exist as a social world. After the submersion of first-class spaces, only material traces of excess remained. Floating objects, damaged structures, altered rooms, silent records of what had happened. None of this was meant to become memory, but it did. Each displaced object reflected choices, priorities, and the limits of a vision built on absolute comfort. Luxury did not vanish entirely, but it lost its meaning. What remained became history's evidence. With total silence and complete submersion, the story of first class reached its end. The ocean closed what engineering, comfort, and status could not sustain. The Titanic stood as mankind's ultimate faith in progress and technology. That night, that faith met its limits. Luxury did not survive, nor did the illusion of invincibility that came with it. What endured was only the historical record of an illusion that sank with the ship.